This week you are working on Essay 3, and there are two areas of argumentation that I would like to explain. First of all, the Essay 3 assignment relates to mothers and fathers, and here is the topic: which parent has the greatest impact on a child's upbringing, the mother or the father? Take a position and write a well-developed essay. So this is another argument essay. You are going to use ideas from articles and from the book we've been reading. And as I said, I want you to use a couple of other strategies and elements of argumentation in this paper. First of all, look at this page called Rhetorical Appeals in Argumentation. In the previous week, you watched a short presentation in which these three ideas, logos, pathos, and ethos, were mentioned. But this week, I want to focus on this as a very effective tool to use in argumentation. These are the rhetorical appeals that were developed by Aristotle, and I have on this page some examples of each of these three types of rhetorical appeals, and the examples are meant to explain them. First of all, logos. This is the most common type of rhetorical appeal that's used in argumentation. So I have an example of a controversial issue. Imagine that you're writing a paper on the topic of whether the U.S. should allow political refugees such as Syrians to emigrate to the U.S. Your position is the U.S. government should allow Syrians political asylum in the U.S. So here is a nice bit of logos here. This is a logical argument. Since the Syrian war has escalated, Germany, of all the European countries, has been the one that's granted asylum to thousands of Syrians. These immigrants are now living in German towns and cities, and we don't hear reported issues about terrorism or anything untoward that's going on with these immigrants. So this is a logical argument. If you want to persuade somebody that the U.S. government should allow Syrians to come to the U.S., what better logical example than to say, here's another developed country that has granted asylum to Syrians, and they're now living, thousands are now living in Germany with no problem. Okay, the second kind of rhetorical appeal is ethos. Okay, ethos is the one where you're trying to show the reader that you're a reasonable person. And one way to do that is to make a concession, to concede. Okay, the opposing side does have a valid point, and I want to answer that point. So here's a good ethos argument. Some Americans fear that some Syrian immigrants could be violent religious fundamentalists. So that's the reason why these Americans oppose immigration. The U.S. government should acknowledge this concern by carefully screening immigrants to ensure that they don't pose a threat. So with these two sentences, again, you're conceding, you're acknowledging that you're a reasonable person, that I understand why some Americans could be afraid about Syrian immigrants, and the government can take this concern into account by carefully screening immigrants. And the last example of a rhetorical appeal is pathos, and this can be the strongest of all three, because here you're appealing to the reader's emotions. And listen to this passage. I think you can see clearly that it's very emotional and could be a very effective piece of evidence in an argument. In April 2017, hundreds of citizens in a town in northern Syria were killed by chemical warfare used in the fight between the Syrian army and rebel forces. Victims reportedly suffocated after inhaling the deadly chemical, among them women and children. One Syrian father who lost 22 family members in the attack was shown in a video cradling his lifeless 9-month-old twin daughter and son, mumbling, "Say goodbye, baby, say goodbye." If that doesn't make a reader emotionally impacted, then I don't know what to say. I think this is a very strong piece of pathos evidence. So, read these examples. There's a video that explains these 3 rhetorical appeals, and see what you can do in terms of using this kind of evidence in your next argument paper. And the other rhetorical tool that you can use in an argument is refutation. Refutation means that I'm going to take a little time in my essay to include one paragraph that responds to the opposing side's argument, that states that opposing side's argument and then refutes or argues against it. So here is a sample topic. Should immigrants give up their original culture and assimilate completely into the American culture, or should they retain their original culture and pass it on to their children? So I'm going to assume that you hold position B to be true. This is your claim. Immigrants should retain their original cultural norms and pass them on to their children who are raised in the American culture. So before I start to write my refutation paragraph, I need to know what the other side's arguments are. And so that's why here on this page you will see a list of arguments on both sides of this issue. So I'm going to study the opposing arguments, and then I'm going to craft a refutation paragraph. And here's an example. So it starts out by introducing the opposing side's argument. We can call that the counter argument. Some people argue that immigrants must relinquish their native culture in order to assimilate into a new society. Some Americans contend that assimilation will ultimately benefit both immigrants and Native Americans. So that's the other side's position. Now I need to refute it. I need to argue against it. And it's logical that I start with a word like however, because I'm going to present an opposing view. However, this idea is absurd. Any American who thinks that is so should recall how their ancestors nearly massacred thousands of Native American Indians so that the dominant Western culture might prevail. Now, 200 years later, most Americans feel ashamed that U.S. settlers murdered Native Americans and stole their homeland. These true Native Americans live in virtual imprisonment on small parcels of land, still unassimilated. So this is the refutation, the rebuttal of that opposing argument. And then the paragraph continues. You can read it in full, but that's kind of the format of a refutation paragraph. You present the opposing side, and then you try to knock it down or refute it. This page also has a template for writing a refutation paragraph. There's lots of different ways to do this. So in this next essay, you're going to need to include an extra paragraph of refutation. I hope these explanations have helped. If you have further questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.